Hi my creatures. Beauty, I'm passing here at the beginning of this video to give you some news. From today, we will have a new narrator here on the channel, and many of you already know him. But relax. That HB will continue narrating the same amount as always here on the channel. As for me, because of all the strikes on this channel, I will be narrating on the new channel. And if you don't know this new channel, go there, because there are many incredible videos and works that will no longer be released here. Only there. Just click on the link that will be here, either in the pinned comment or in the description. We launched an enrollment welcome to Mangaticos. It all started in 2045. And yes, even having these strange monsters. We were on Earth. So much so that some human beings were even trying to fight these monsters. But some died. Others lost hope. But not everyone was in that cake there. Because among them there was a soldier who was killing many and many monsters. In fact, he wasn't a soldier or anything, but the boss, in command of the last line of defense of the Earth, Samsung. But to better understand what was happening, I need to explain to you that humanity has been at war against monsters for decades. And so after several battles, endless, humanity was almost extinct. However, they were very close to complete their objective. The thing is that out of nowhere, Samsung was illuminated with a magic circle and simply disappeared from the side of his companions. Or better, he was teleported to a place where he was totally chained, while some strange voices were saying that they finally managed to summon the hero from another world. Just like that, an old man approached, congratulating Hansung for having arrived at the Empire and skipping all formalities. The old man there wanted Hansung to simply kill the Demon King, since theoretically he is the hero, right? And it's obvious. Hansung didn't want to do that. But by the magic called Oath of Containment, he was simply electrocuted and could not disobey. Oh, and of course, the old man asked Hansung not to resist, since that magic wouldn't hurt him, as long as he was gentle. But summarizing my chat, the people there summoned Hansung out of nowhere, in a not-so-friendly way, asking him to simply kill the Demon King. And if he did that, and then save the Empire, maybe, they would return him to his original world. And of course, asking in such a polite way, which it isn't, he would accept. Not in this case. It was by free and spontaneous pressure. But whatever. In the end, he had to accept. And with that, like a hero from another world, Hansung had to work nonstop, and made countless expeditions and went out, cutting down several monsters, thus passing several years as well. But the funniest thing about it all is that even after he killed the Demon King, yes, he killed the Demon King, he had one more mission. According to Old Man, this was the last one, which obviously left Hansung revolted, because that's not what he had said when he summoned him. However, the old man said that saving the Empire does not end with the death of the Demon King, since still, there were those who opposed the unification of the Empire, and they needed to be eliminated. In short, he will have to eliminate that blondie there, and then finally Hansung will be freed. Then of course Hansung would accept, right? After all, it was such a kind request from the old man, as Hansung couldn't do much there. He reached the kingdom of the Teutonic Knights, and managed to defeat the designated target. Like this, Hansung even apologized to the blonde guy who is called Badu, declaring that it was not his choice. And Badu, in view of this, said that Hansung didn't need to apologize. After all, he too would soon be discarded. And boy, Badu there must be a seer. Or he forgot to warn Hansung, because in the next panel he simply was stabbed in the back by a man with grayish hair, silver, called Count Brandenburg. I think it is. It's kind of the reason Hansung is being discarded, because in the end a dog of hunting only knows how to bite. And already fallen on the ground, Hansung was already revolted, right, saying that in the end he would die that way. So it didn't matter. After all, he would not forget this humiliation, and he would do that Empire pay for all this humiliation. And so that night, one life closed its eyes forever, while another opened, which in the case, our Hansung, aka our protagonist, ended up reincarnating in another body. Where his mother was a blonde, he didn't know. But already his father, they're already a different story. He was just the black necromancer, plus the strongest on the continent called Saxum. besides him being a duke of the empire. But specifically, he was in the necropolis, the place where the Black Tower was. But the story doesn't say aside to explain that. Why he reincarnated in another body is because before he died, he had a stone of reincarnation, something to alcohol. He tried to hide from the people there in the empire, to have a chance to get revenge against them. It meant that in the end, he already knew he was going to be betrayed. Right? The problem is that this reincarnation stone sent the user's soul to a random place. But in the end, he was lucky to be born in the house of a duke. That does not. The house is one of the most important families in the empire. In short, at least this time, he was born into a rich house. The problem is that while our protagonist was thinking about that, he didn't cry as soon as he was born. What? People have already started saying that maybe it was bad omen. But internally Hansung said that I wouldn't cry. Right after all, he is an adult inside. That to make matters worse, the second babysitter, to see if he was really okay, she simply went there and gave him a huge slap on the butt. What Hansung managed to hold. But at the same time, he was a little revolted with his parents, because the nanny was literally hitting him to make him cry, which makes absolutely no sense. Only what makes even less sense is that his mother tried to hit him too, but actually she didn't hit. Or better, she touched gently on your skin. And right at that moment, Hansung ended up remembering something. Because since he remembers, he had never felt this human warmth with so much comfort and solidarity. That is, in the end, instead of crying in pain, even being an adult with many, many years of experience, with just one touch of his mother, he started to cry without even stopping. That is, we have an 8-year time skip where the father and mother of our protagonist were talking. That it was a lot of fun and 8 years had already passed. They didn't even see us either. Anyway, the Samsung, or better saying now called Deal, lived studying in the library since he was 4 years old, meant he was interested in magic. The problem is that according to our prota's mother, he could not learn his father's black magic. The thing is that while they were talking about it, out of nowhere a servant arrived desperate, saying that something was happening in the office where I hate was. And getting there, Sashi noticed that his son was emanating a mana, a little bit strange. And then the prota's mother already started fighting a lot with him, while Sashin was analyzing that mana. That obviously didn't make sense to Sashin. After all, his son is only 8 years old. Of course, to be sure, nothing is better than asking directly. The thing is that he didn't do it in such a friendly way. So much so that Deus got kind of bugged if trying. Imagine an excuse to speak. But in the end, the Saxon just said that this was expected of his son. Of course it was a pity. He couldn't teach necromancy to his son, but at least he was proud. And hearing about this business of not being able to learn necromancy, Deus was already revolted. And how much his revenge cost. But as there was nothing else to do in the office, Prota simples meant FOI and Bora. While his father said he had already thought about which gift he would give him on his birthday the next day. And so already on the day of the party that, which was the next day, it was full of people. Brown Noser, Dudu, wanting to know where the young master is, and speaking of him, he was on the second floor. Kind of revolted, right? Because it's like, in his previous life, he lived alone. So, full of people around him trying to suck up to him is somewhat strange. But leaving that aside then, I was kind of obsessed with what happened the day before, right? Because he just took a look at a book. Where were the remnants of his previous life? And your mana simply got out of control. And another. Why the hell? He couldn't learn necromancy. His body is perfect for that. Besides, according to what he heard, before leaving the night before, his father had prepared a gift for him. Or something. But interrupting his thoughts, out of nowhere our prota's mother arrived. Oh, and for those who want to know, he was going to be 8 years old, okay. Anyway, that person who was behind our protagonist's mother is simply an elder of the Blue Magic Tower, and also a master of water magic. And her name was Lady Sepia. And the reason she's there, it's more than obvious, right? She would be our protagonist's teacher, which basically counted as his present, right? Which meant that the prota's mother wanted him to learn the magic of water that focused on defense and interruption. Totally the opposite compared to necromancy. But interrupting the prota's thoughts, Sepia asked them to talk alone for a bit. And so, already outside, Sepia, without hesitation, commented that I probably hate. Was totally outraged. Disappointed actually, right? Because if he was outraged, he would have yelled at his mother. With his father. A lot of things. But back to the story. Sepia knew it was natural for the. I was disappointed, since it was obvious that he wanted to learn necromancy, which is his father's magic. And the reason for this. My chats. Sepia told us. Apparently at the time when Helena Hugo, our protagonist's mother, that I only found out her name now, was being courted by Saxum. She was afraid of his bad reputation. That's why on the wedding day, he used a science from the Black Tower, who lived walking around in black clothes, wore white clothes, together with a promise that his legacy covered would not be passed on to the next generation. And that's why the Prota, in the end, ended up screwing himself and won't be able to learn necromancy. Of course, that was somewhat waste with quality and skill that our Prota had. That's why Sepia said she's going to find a way to persuade the Prota's mother. However, still, she would not give up on teaching our protagonist. Ahead of this statement, God didn't understand very well, right? Because as far as he knows, the elves valued the laws of nature. So the act of reviving the dead was something that was kind of a taboo for them. But Sepia said that it doesn't make any sense to her, since theoretically the priest's divine power revive people too. So, how is this not part of the laws of nature either? And for anyone who didn't understand anything in her head, necromancy or divine resurrection is the same thing, and gives explanations and a lot of blah blah blah. The first objective of our protagonist is to form a circle. For him to do this, he needed to put his hand on his heart and concentrate. And like this, very boring. We already know that that one is a world totally different from Earth, where it is full of mana. But there was one thing. Human beings couldn't withstand the pure mana that was in the air, and for that they needed to filter them in a way, which in this case is creating a circle around the heart. And so, there were others. Instructions that Sep was passing on to our Prota, and she asked him not to rush so much. And take it easy. Because normally, it took a month to form the circle. The thing is she's talking about Dio, aka our protagonist who finished this in 5 minutes, which obviously didn't make sense. And to demonstrate, Dio simply invoked the magic out of your heart. And to be even more sure, Sep asked the Prota to cast a spell that theoretically was supposed to hurt his heart, since it was the first time that his magic lines inside his body was casting a spell. Oh, just so you know, in the Prota's previous life, in the previous body more specifically, he even had magic, but it was in a slightly different way. In the case, he had spells engraved on his body, and he didn't simply conjure them, which in the end was a somewhat painful process, since he had no magic circle. But unlike his previous body, this body had an innate talent for magic. And with this thought, magnet focusing and letting mana flow to the tip of your fingers, he created a more lethal fragment that would be aimed at the Empire's throat. And seeing the form of God's magic, Sepia kind of wasn't believing it, right? Because it doesn't make sense to have a geometric shape as good as that one. The thing is that in her head, maybe the Prota focused too much on the geometric shape and not on the destructive power, to which he simply shut her up in the frame, following, shooting the tree, and simply destroying her from the inside out. And boy, from here on out, no need to even say it, right? She didn't even have any more words. So much that not even her thoughts were having anything anymore. Or better, even had. She questioned who the hell this kid was. That with just 8 years old this destructive power is like. After analyzing where the god had hit, Sepia still couldn't believe it. Because what the god used was a basic magic, but its destructive power was absurd. And speaking of the god, he asked Sepia if by any chance he had done something wrong. But by Zepia's little smile there, it certainly wasn't like that. Because the god managed to formulate the 3 known golden techniques of magic, which was acceleration, rotation, and compression. The thing is, he managed to do these 3 with perfection, okay? And of course, given that, she started to realize why, and that his father was so sorry for not being able to pass the magic. Black forward. And speaking of Sax in the next frame, Sepia said she could no longer teach Dio. That already bugged the Sax. Because come on, he was talking to an elder of the Blue Tower. So, how could she not teach something to her son? With everything. The moment Sepia said that, Deus managed to perfectly execute an attack magic. Besides the attack, contained the 3 basic formulas of magic. But summing up what she wanted to say to Saxon, your son is ridiculously amazing. And another thing, it wasn't like she didn't want to teach Dio. In fact, she was even looking forward to it. But there was one small big detail. Deus actually wanted the magic of the Black Archmage. Of course the Sepia knew of the promise Saxon had made and stuff. However, he couldn't take this matter so lightly. After all, this would decide his son's future, and maybe the educated. And while this conversation was going on, there I was trying to hear her, but didn't understand anything. When out of nowhere some guys appeared. Apparently he was a good guy, since Deus smiled, calling him Uncle Real Mutt, and this Real Mutt there declared to Deus that he had been finishing with all kinds of horrible monsters. In a few words, it meant they were in the dungeon, and it's just the most problematic thing in the world. After the Demon King himself, since the damage where these dungeons appeared is incalculable, and to try to deal with these monsters, the knights lived fighting in danceably against these monsters. Oh, and like that, in the Prota's previous life, he had to deal with several monsters. So much so that in the territory of Sading, which is where he stayed, the monsters there were basically annihilated. Because it's all the dirty work was done by our protagonist, so that in the end the Duke there receives all the credit and become the next emperor. But he interrupted our conversation, and out of nowhere our protagonist's father appeared, and just at that moment his mother also appeared. And as they were there, Helena already started congratulating the Odeo because he managed to reach his first magic circle. Sax also congratulated, questioning what your Prota wanted. And of course that at first he really wanted. Learn necromancy magic, right? But since he couldn't ask for that, he pretended to be silly, saying he wanted a little sister, which already left a kind of strange atmosphere in the air. And so a while later at nightfall, when he went to lie down in his room, out of nowhere he started having a nightmare of when he died, where the Count saw her stabbed in the back, asking why he was so happy, just because now he was having the experience of having good parents and a good house. He could simply be happy like that. After all, an empire would never let him go, so it was good for him to be prepared. And after having this nightmare of his, he already started having a heart attack. Or better, his circle started to enter a reflux, so as not to cause a big commotion. He went outside, trying to get a little air, to see if it improved. But it seems it got worse. And out of nowhere CEP appeared, reflecting that every time she looked at our protagonist, she felt a feeling of danger. And not muchachos even thinking that way. Then she saved the god. Because according to what she knew, if by any chance the god there, if in a malice he could become something irreversible in the future. Yes, after Sapia helped Deus, he explained that the essence of magic is the mirror of the heart. That in a few words, magic could change, depending on the characteristics of the wizard. Only going more straight to the point. The talent of Deus' magic was absurdly high and very dangerous, since he had magic that could take lives. And because of that, she gave him a book, declaring that that was the only thing that could help him. And perhaps it was the last thing she could teach him. And yes, weird aura and a symbol of the devil in the middle. That one there is a book of necromancy. And one more. That book there is a birthday present for Deal. Which is, he got kind of emotional and even hugged Sepia. I don't judge, right? I would do the same. The thing is that this master is looking a lot. How strange, right? Because of, where did she get this necromancy book from? Anyway, going back to the story, a few days later Sepia took Dio on a hunt, where he should use that magic he had learned. To which, yes, if he succeeded, bursting a tree, a poor thing. A rabbit is nothing, right? And another thing Sepia could notice. He hesitated to kill a living being. And before that, once again she began to explain that magic can be completely different, depending on each person. Because in short, everything she said here is basically, it reflects what is inside someone's heart. Even the names of the spells they live in Toyo. It's just for them to have a better mental image. In addition, each tower had its own conviction. For example, the red tower valued order through power, while the blue tower valued order through harmony. And so, of course, there were other towers. That basically, each one of them was reflections of their ideologies. But this is something too complex for Deo to learn now. That's why she leaves it aside. But now going back to magical training. The first necromancy magic that Deo used was zombification. It is basically control a body through magical threads. And that's it. There is nothing more. But Much already had one thing. If he could control one body through magic threads, he could use another magic in this body, right? Thinking about it, Deus went there and used his ice magic to create an armor on the rabbit he had zombified. It is clear that to see if Deus's magic was good, Scipio went there and attacked and showed that it was even good. And as this was Deus's first magic conquest, Scipio went there and asked if by any chance he wanted something. And he replied yes. Actually, he wanted Scipio help him learn basic water magic, which I thought Scipio would accept instantly, since she was eager to teach the prot. But not hey. According to her, what Deo has done so far was the most basic magic of the basics of water, and just like all other magics, each of them has a complex level of learning. It was already difficult to learn a single magic. Imagine two. Even more for a child. That's why it wasn't an option for our protagonist, who was already revolted, right? Because how is it? He couldn't learn. He needed to get his revenge. Well, with this thought in mind and very revolted, at nightfall, he went to the library of his house and started learning on his own to kind of surprise the Sipa, showing that he really was capable. And my chat, I think he got too excited that he didn't even sleep. But at least in the next day's class, he already demonstrated that he could completely dominate that basic magic of necromancy along with the armor, which already scared Sepia from the start. But he continued showing something more, which in this case was an ice explosion, accompanied by an explosion of corpses, which in the end gave what? An explosion with purple fire, along with many pieces of ice. And yes, that caught the Sipa by surprise, because in the end what the Prota did was basically combine two types of magic, water and darkness. Oh, of course, given this fact, he was qualified as a double mage, right? And of course, given that whole situation, the Sepia had never imagined that it was possible to combine two magics that way, and others. Shards of ice that were scattered all over the place. Side looked like blades. It was almost like it was a technique made to kill something that would only come from someone coming from the battlefield. So Kim Ray's. Or what was that child's inner world like? And leaving this magic talk aside, out of nowhere, the Reumute appeared, along with a certain black cavalry, which in short is the main force of Sasha's house. And who led these people there? Who defeated the monsters? For those who don't remember, it's Reumute, which is basically one of the 7 swords of the entire continent. Meant for those who didn't understand bullying to do one. The guy is too good with the sword. That's why. Obviously I hate him. Was not going to miss this chance. So he asked the real mute to teach the art of sword for him, to which he quickly accepted, and returned to the territory together with Odeo. And arriving there, Sepp once again started making the report, saying that today, unlike the day before, Deal not only used another attack spell, as he also became a double mage at the age of 8 of age. And that already worried Saxum and Helena, right? But it is. Cepheus said he was teaching water magic that the Proto wanted. The problem is that water magic was not the only thing that God wanted to learn. That's why as a teacher, she wanted to cater to her students' whims. It is before that. I thought Helena was going to say something nasty to Sepia, but no. She just asked Sepia to continue teaching water magic, which she graciously accepted. And obvious, she apologized to Saxon, because she kind of broke the vow not to teach black magic to her son, which doesn't make sense, right? Because Saxon didn't teach anything. But okay. And already on Saxon's side, he was afraid Helena would say something. But in fact, she was kind of surprised that her son was a prodigy. And of course because of that. So Saxon had to be honest with her, saying he wanted to teach black magic to his daughter, because like he would be the heir from then on. So he should be strong. And another being a wizard, a father, and obviously, he wanted to give his all to his son and pass on his magic. And because of that, he already started apologizing to Helena, and she said she was fine, even though black magic is considered taboo. However, this would change if by some chance, God simply became strong enough to shut up everyone who spoke ill of him. It's like that, muchachos. Helena basically accepted that Saxon would teach black magic. It's already started. Basically, instantaneously, okay? The problem is that apparently, maybe our protagonist wasn't that brilliant after all, because in the instant in which he began to learn that his father, he already took a hell of a beating. Then Saxon told his son that while he is his disciple, he shouldn't use such mediocre necromancy. So he placed a lot of books in front of Deus that summarized the structure of the human body, of all the beings in that world. That translating for us, Deus would have to learn at 8 years old, higher-level medicine books. And so after reading everything and memorizing all of them, he had only learned the basics. And only now would the real lesson begin. And speaking of lesson, the first thing Deus should do is touch a body of goblin, to which Saxon began to explain to Deus that, depending on their necromancy skills, a higher-level body, for example, a knight of 7 swords, like real mute, could become totally useless in the hands of a garbage necromancer, but the body of a goblin could become a knight of death in the hand of a good necromancer. In a few words, if you were good, anything would do. The thing is that, the instant the god started the zombification on that goblin, he already started to suffer, because apparently the structure is totally different from a rabbit, and the mana connections were also totally different, which already made many things difficult. And seeing that his son was suffering, Saxon began to explain that accelerate such rigor mortis to make it more resistant people had been a good idea. The problem is that if he did too much, limited the body's movements, and his actions speak louder than words, the Saxon began to use his black magic in that goblin body. So he started explaining to the deal that the rib cage actually worked for the living, the protection of internal organs and such, but as the current goblin was a corpse, so he didn't need that. In other words, God should understand the structure of his target and modify it for your purpose. Before this statement, God has already stayed extremely surprised and has already asked his father to tell him what was the philosophy. Casilda philosophy is not philosophy, not from the Black Tower. That, in a few words, according to Saxon, is the truth behind death. Or better, the truth exists within death, so that I hate to achieve this. He needed to understand the weight of life. How good made him remember a trauma from his previous life, where a person begged for their life, and Hansung killed her. So without hesitating, which showed that perhaps I hate understood the weight of life very well, or he simply ignored it, like with the magical pitadeo of God, growing day after day together, with the information that the Duke of Saxum was teaching black magic to his son. Several people, including the royal nobility, began to keep an eye on our protagonist, and together with his family. And speaking of our protagonist, I hate was training with the real mute the art of fencing. Even though he was 8 years old, he was even good. Well, maybe good was little, because he managed to face real mute, and even managed to disarm him. And after losing his sword, the Remuda started kind of congratulating the Prota, but he said that was nothing, because the god didn't even use all his power with everything. Leaving that idea aside, the Remuda commented that the skill of God was so good at fencing that it was a pity that he was a mage, and another he didn't need to train so hard. After all, the knights would protect him. Or maybe he had some other reason to try to learn fencing. My god said it's obvious, as it would be quite pathetic if the Duke's son had to depend only on guards and magic for their own defense, only internally. Actually, he was just taking the opportunity to learn with one of the strongest swordsmen on the continent. Of course, in the face of this statement, the real mute was already starting to get very happy, saying that he wanted to have a son like the Prota. I don't know what. And just at that moment, interrupting their conversation, Helena appeared calling for the Deo, saying he had some news to give. That in the case, the birthday present that Deo had asked for had arrived. And after thinking what kind of gift he had asked for, he remembered that it was a sister. And of course he was happy, and I didn't understand very well. It was fast the catch. Well, it is like that. We have a 10-month time skip. Where I was seeing your sister. And Helena gave that opportunity if she could hold her, to which he held her in his arms. And Saxon asked Reddy how he felt, affirmed the sister of God was in his arms, and didn't even cry being in him. And taking advantage of this opportunity, Saxon asked how the proto was feeling. And in the face of this, Deo kind of answered with an enigma, saying that at the same time that his sister was light, she was also heavy. And before this statement, Saxon replied that this was the weight of a life, something he would never should forget. And speaking of teaching, apparently Sepia was waiting for Dion, and he had to go outside to have another class with her. This time, according to her, it would be a practical class, which in short will be the fight between the two. After all, Sepia wanted to know how much Dia had grown in the meantime, and as soon as the fight started, she managed to deflect his attacks here and there, and she was already outraged. Because from what she could feel, our protagonist was taking it too easy with her, which was obviously an insult. And to show that she wasn't there playing around, she made an attack, to which our protax defended himself in shock. And of course before that, he would start taking things more seriously. Recognition. The first thing he did was to erect an ice wall with density. Absurd. That according to Sepia had the same density as steel, but that's what doesn't make sense. He simply erected that wall, right? Since theoretically they were fighting. However, while she was thinking about it, out of nowhere that wall opened. So Dio appeared using explosion magic, with many and many fragments. And through the hole that gave in the next frame, me and so ended up losing his teacher. And going back a bit in time, he was happy for the spells he had cast, which in this case was that protection, and that explosion, which looked more like a grenade than an explosion. Seeing that his messy was totally perforated, he already panicked. But relax, it was just an illusion, but still very annoying. Our protagonist's attack ended up surrounding the sepia, which ended up catching her by surprise. Because it's a power, somewhat absurd for the first circle. Therefore, she congratulated our protagonist. In another, she was happy that Deus believed in her. After all, he used all his power against her, right? And more being a master. Obviously, she was happy to have a so powerful like him. And she was so happy, but so happy, that when she realized she was talking to Saxon again, where he asked why she was scratched on the cheek, which she replied that it was because of an exercise here and there. But leaving that one aside, Saxon asked Sepia a favor. But before that, he explained that they received the news that an order of orcs crossed the mountain and entered the territory, something to which their little cavalry couldn't handle. And just hearing that, Sepia already kind of understood what Saxon meant, and he keeps saying that it's obvious that Dio wasn't prepared for this yet. However, being the heir to the duchy, he should take responsibility for the future of his own territory. Then of course he wouldn't send his son without any preparation. That's why he was going to prepare a little artifact there. For those who want to know, the artifact is basically this. It increased the user's power, depending on what he sacrificed. In the case, mana or life. And so, sometime later, Saxon was taking Deal to the depot of artifacts from the Duchy of Saxon, and he explained to Deal that he should prepare for next battle he would face. But before that, he needed to control the power of the Saxon family shadows. All those artifacts inside that deposit from the Demon King era, and the Proto could choose one from there. The thing is that these artifacts had consciousness, own, and ego, so he shouldn't go out touching any he found. The deal is that it took Saxon a little while to explain, because the silver was already gone, and already on God's side. While he was walking, he heard some voices coming out of the artifacts, to which the great majority felt the hatred he had inside the deal. However, he didn't stay captivated by any of those artifacts. When out of nowhere, he looked back and saw a cape standing before him. And from what he remembers, it's from the time he was a hero. Okay, this cape here. After all, he fought against the Demon King, right? So if he didn't remember, for God's sake. Or better, he remembered. because the owner of this cape was the captain of the demonic army he fought, and he had a very annoying shadow ability to keep adapting it and kind of control the shadows as if they were something alive. And as it was for him to control the shadow powers of his family, obviously he chose this cape. The thing is that the instant he put it on, he was taken to a world of shadows, to which apparently, he will have to fight against those shadows for him to master that cape. Meanwhile, on the outside, Sepia and Saxon were kind of worried, right? That it had been a while since Deus was inside that circle. If it took too long, he could be corrupted by those shadows. So depending on how long it takes, they will have to interfere. But there wasn't even time for that, because in the next instant, the Deus managed to get out of that hole, thanking his teacher and his father. Speaking in the sax, he was kind of scared of his son's talent. After all, he mastered an artifact somewhat quickly. And speaking of which, interrupting his thoughts, the Deus asked his father if by any chance he could get another artifact, since they were there, right? To which, well, Sax without accepted. There wasn't much to do anyway. A few days later, in the Duke's training fields, the real Must was kind of worried, right? Because Deus was using the Cloak of Shadows, which was known to be a difficult artifact to deal with. And when it replied that actually, it was very easy to deal with. Realmani asked how the hell this happened. Deus said that even he didn't know, because the moment he put on the shadow cloak, it simply rolled over him and didn't want to leave anymore, which meant that maybe he needed a friend, or was lonely. Something like Realmut commented that maybe the protagonist's heart was very good, and that's why the mantle wanted to get closer to him. But in reality, it's totally the opposite, right? So much so that the protagonist found a way to shut up from the shadows of the shadow cloak. But leaving that aside, I hate that Chinu Ryumute if by any chance they could have a combat duel, to which Ryumute instantly agreed. And it is clear that before this, then Odeo was already a little scared. But Ryumute said he would be fine. In the case, he would only use fencing and not a drop of aura. Me seeing that, Deus was already outraged, because he wanted to fight against 100% of the real mute. But leaving that aside, the purpose of this training there is a combat practice for him to learn how to use the mantle of darkness, since everything would depend on how he could manipulate these shadows. Is stopping all this talk, Odeo was the first to make the attack, which the real mute defended peacefully, which was quite impressive, wasn't it? Since he wasn't even using the aura, and managed to stop the shadow only with the sword attack. And so he quickly pounced on Odeo, to which he dodged the attack, and counterattacked with shadow magic on Romote's foot, who managed to defend and counterattack, causing Deus to defend in shock. And so the fight continued with, really, trying to attack and Deus defending little by little. Meanwhile, on the audience side, everyone was shocked, because the great majority of the knights there couldn't exchange 2 sword blows with the real that they already lost. Meanwhile, our protagonist was hitting head-on, even though Real wasn't using the aura. But still he was just a child. Of course, in front of that one, they already started to imagine God as an insurmountable mountain. That's how it is. A few days later, on the day of God's departure, Helena even tried to convince the Saxon, but it didn't look like it was going to work. After all, she was worried about her son, didn't want him to get hurt, and Deus was even a little moved by this. However, he declared that he needed to become stronger, so that one day he could inherit the duchy, and another he needed to protect her and her sister. That's why he asked earnestly for his mother to understand the situation, to which good. After a brief silence, she had to accept. And so, during dawn, at the temporary base of the Saxon group, our prota's father asked him to give the order to march. In his place, after all the black cavalry, the pride of the Saxon house, one day would be under his command. In a few words, those men were already his knights, so they should at least order them once. Of course, hearing that, Deus already had a big chest, speaking, "Damn, one day this thing will be mine." Then he started to declare that the time has come for them to leave. After all, they were the blade of the educated. For this battle against the orcs, 250 men, along with the elite sniper unit, positioned in the White Mountains. called the Winter Watchman, would make a surprise attack against more or less 1,000 orcs. But to make this surprise attack, they needed to cross a river. And how are you going to cross a river with 250 men at an absurd speed? Simple. Make an ice bridge with an elder of the Blue Tower. That's how. Sepp wished Saxon good luck, calling him for some reason Your Majesty. And the moment it was our prota's turn, he wished his teacher good luck, who doesn't even want to participate in the battle, I think. And obviously she was surprised. How happy with this comment. After all, she didn't know what it was like to have a disciple who cared so much with his teacher. Something so good to have. And so some time later, we are transported to the orcs' temporary base, where the snipers, who are the guardians of winter, made the first attack, thus defeating many and many orcs. But not all of them. And taking advantage of your opportunity, the black cavalry set off towards the orcs. And seeing the whole situation from above, the Realmo asked Uadeo what he thought of that. After many and many nerd thoughts, full of math, Adeo reflected that this was a one-sided battle, to which Saxon also agreed. But according to Real Mutt, they shouldn't lower their guard. Still, in the end, the ambush had been very good, but it wasn't enough for Nicholas. That's why their objective was to make successive attacks, killing little by little the remaining ones that were left. And following this line of thinking, they sent a signal to retreat. And as soon as the cavalry, Black, was retreating, one of the soldiers was caught by one of the orcs' spears, which at the moment this happened, Saxon commented that it was bad luck, since that was a death. And hearing that, Deus was already outraged, because how that would mean that he was a man. Dead, he's more than alive there, dude. And another, the two, they would just stand there watching, while a soldier was dying in front of them. Seeing that the two didn't answer anything, Deus has already started to analyze the situation, and noticed that he couldn't get there. And thinking a little more, he noticed that he could make a ranged attack. But the problem is that the orc's leather is as much as hard. That's why he should formulate an ice magic, as if it were a bullet from the Earth's rifles. And following this line of thinking, he literally managed to take a shot from the mountain, like a sniper. So much so that even Saxon remutified him, surprised by the power and precision of this attack. But while they were surprised, the god simply took a horse and started to descend, to which the Saxon asked the mute river not to follow the god. Meanwhile, internally, he was thinking about that attack that the god just did, and he was too precise and perfect, which meant that his son's inner world was already complete. And speaking of the god, internally, he was reflecting on the situation, that taking a look at it currently, he had two problems. The first is that the soldier he wanted to save was in complete shock. And secondly, his magic takes too long to be conjured. That to summarize all the explanation he gave here, he needed to do an absurd math problem. And that's why it took so long. However, using some formulas here and there, he managed to make it a little bit faster, thus piercing the orc's head and approaching the soldier, who was totally scared, and asking why the young master was there. The god just declared that he shouldn't worry. After all, the House of Saxe would never abandon a sword. That shows loyalty. Oh, and of course, the bows won't be waiting for the silver to finish making a statement like that, and then attack. They simply went up, to which I hate. He simply summoned a dark blade, using the cloak of shadows. And that's it. It didn't even count as a fight, because it was night, full of shadows. And the only thing God asked of the mantle is that he devour the orcs in front of him. And boy, the first orc that was in front was literally sucked. Only the bones of the poor guy remained. Anyway, after killing some orcs here and there, God was forced to take the soldier with him, because he couldn't get up, and it was quite a strange pose, looking like the soldier is actually the princess, and our protel is the prince. Anyway, after that, the real Mutt sent the rest of the black cavalry, finished the job of killing the orcs. The thing is that sometime later, at their temporary base, Saxon called God to have a little conversation with him. In fact, he went straight to the point, asking why, hell, I hate you had done something so foolish. So much for going to the front line. To which the good Dean understood, right? Because he did everything right. Why was he taking a beating out of nowhere? But to give an answer to his father, he explained, right, that the knights of the House of Sasha are the ones he will lead one day. So he had simply done something that was worthy of this position. But Saxon said that this is too weak a reason. Me seeing this. Then the god got a little revolted, asking why his father didn't do anything, seeing a knight die in front of him. So the Saxon began to explain that their territory was very close to territory of the Demon King. So they lived constantly fighting against monsters. And for that reason, the knights were trained in a way to which they should raise their swords without waiting for someone to save them. And the action that Deo took made them believe that someone will always be there to save them. This was obviously a problem, because how many knights will survive with this type of thinking on the front line? And of course, the Sax is not so heartless to simply let a soldier die in case something appeared, or an enemy that was too strong for the knights to handle. And then yes, and he would intervene. And in the face of all these arguments, God could not refute, because it was something he himself knew in his previous life. But still, muchachos, Saxon commented that the way God had acted, according to his conviction, left a mark on the knights. That's why he shouldn't be so sad. A while later, the story of what had happened on the battlefield against the orcs that day spread throughout the empire. Of course, 90% of the story is true, with a touch of drama, but it was the same story. The thing is that the god was kind of ashamed of his own story of what he did. But what made him most ashamed is that some time later, in the knight's training camp, he was simply hailed as king. And of course that was something that was leaving him a little with shame. But the real Mount told the god that he should be proud finally. He was the future of the fallen, so they should do their best to serve him. But leaving that aside, out of nowhere, a maid arrived, commenting that the guests of the house O'Hart had arrived. And these people from the O'Hart house is the people led by Bartle, that last little guy that Hansung killed before he became the Deo. The thing is that later, after Hansung killed Barnett back then, the O'Hart family ended up falling into decline and became bankrupt nobles. From what I left, I hate it with a bitter taste in my mouth. That real mute was Bartel's disciple. Anyway, leaving that aside after, I hate greeting your parents. The guests to the O'Hart house had arrived. In this case, it was just a single woman and her daughter, and that woman was Vanessa O'Hart. Next to her was her daughter, called Charlotte O'Hart. The thing is, she wasn't prostrating herself before the Duke, and worse, she was revolted, okay. But Saxon took this disrespect well, and asked Deo to take Charlotte for a walk around the house. To which, well, Charlotte didn't accept it very well. So much so that she even slapped Deal's hand. It's in that Vanessa asked her daughter to apologize to the Duke, to his son. But it is the Charlotte simply took off. And before that, Vanessa had to apologize profusely to the Duke, explaining that Charlotte was going through something lately, which was in the case related to the Count of Benderberg, who was designated as inspector of the hard territory. The thing is that the Count of Benderberg is known as the Pig King, and his nickname came because he was a bit obsessed with supreme talent, and he coveted any skilled swordsman, whether man or woman, to generate a child. Yes, even if that swordsman is a little girl who hasn't even gone through puberty. And before that, Vanessa wanted her daughter not to go through something so terrifying. And because of all these things, Vanessa had gone there to ask Charlotte to be at least an employee of Duke Saxon. Since the O'Hart family was a fallen noble, there was nothing left to protect his daughter. And speaking of Charlotte, a while later, God found her right on the training field. A.O. Cole asked how the hell she got there, and she replied that she didn't even know. But leaving that aside, she asked Deus how his hand was. A.O. Cole replied that he was fine, and she was already happy. That's because she wanted to have a duel against him. To which D, it didn't even understand why. Like he got slapped, was disrespected, and out of nowhere he'll have to fight her. What business is this? But it's obvious that D wasn't going to say that to her. That's why he asked what was the reason for her doing this. Summarizing, it's because of that story that happened, that he saved a knight from 1,000 orcs. I don't know what. And given this story, she wanted to prove her strength against Odeo, in addition to showing her family that she could protect them from that person. The person she was talking about is the Count of Brandenburg, to which Deus Rapaz was already outraged with him. It's like this. Her being an enemy of Brandenburg. God thought that there in front, she could become his ally. But first he needed to show her how the world really was. So he accepted the one-on-one against her. That's it. When she started, Charlotte began to attack incessantly. The thing is that all the attacks the god was defending with a certain tranquility. With everything, when Charlotte increased the pace, God began to have a little difficulty, which has already increased. Charlotte's happiness, that she was at an advantage. And to understand more or less what was going on, her father is that blonde that our protagonist killed there at the beginning, which theoretically was his last mission. And your father was known as Divine Sword, and her mother used to tell stories about him. And inspired by these stories, she started training incessantly to become as strong, or more than him, to protect her family. The thing is that even though she trained like crazy, why the hell wasn't she passing a mere magician? And yes, no matter how strong her attack was, God even managed to disarm her. And of course, in light of this, she began to wonder how the hell she, daughter of the Divine Sword, can win. I gave the one who answered that it's obvious. She wasn't the Divine Sword. And another, with that strength there, she wouldn't be able to beat the Count of Brandenburg. And before she started throwing a tantrum, asking what the hell she should do, I simply swore in the name of her family that he would become the family's guardian, or heart, or better, until he was strong enough to screw the Count of Brandenburg. His family would protect her. But there was a condition. After all, there is no free lunch. Charlotte should swear that she will become the sword of her family in the future. And with that proposal, then obviously Charlotte accepted, since she didn't have much of a choice, right? Of course. It might even seem like a promise between children and stuff, but this was a very valuable oath for the future. Then of course I had done that. Then he went to tell his father, and he already had a closed face, asking if by any chance I had used the name of their family Pena. But God said no, because the bloodline of the Divine Sword is impressive. Besides that, Charlotte's sword talent is very good. So what he basically got was that her family became their sword. Of course, given this statement, Sachin was already a little happier internally. Then I was reflecting that probably now, Benderbug must be very pissed. And boy, the guy is a seer. Because the bug was really angry, huh? Well, apparently, they sent the assassins after Charlotte to capture her, but they didn't come back, which meant they were killed. That's because Charlotte was being protected by Duke Saxonright. But leaving that aside, the Brandenburg began to remember the instant he killed the hero from another world. Besides that good, he had been waiting until today. The sword he pierced the hero with, and it was called Durandal. But leaving that aside, he was eager to build the lineage, perfect on earth, and for that he needed Charlotte. So he declared to his subordinate that he should call all the assassins he found, because he would pay any amount necessary. Boy, this Bunderberger tale is not very right, the idea not. How can such a thing be? Anyway, speaking of Charlotte, a week has passed since she made that oath with God, and so she has studied a lot. And once a day, she has a duel against him. And who supervised this duel was none other than Helmuth, who, seeing the two fighting each other, already got kind of stunned, because the skill they were showing, and the murderous intent during that fight. You couldn't even call them children. But leaving that aside, before something worse happened, Real Mutt stopped the mourning of the two, saying that Charlotte had done very well, only she didn't want empty praise. So Real Mutt was already sincere, asking if she knew what was the main objective of using a rapier, to which Charlotte said it's obvious. Just stock up, right? But Real Mutt said that wasn't it. The principle is to use your two legs. Then he kind of explained in a moment there in the fight that she should have taken the opportunity and have advanced further, instead of retreating. But summarizing all the speeches of the real mute, she needed to rebuild her foundations, because her movements are totally sloppy. And of course, hearing this directly from the real mute, she already got kind of embarrassed and stuff. And already on Deal's side, hearing all this explanation, he started to get kind of scared. Because come on, if you put the talent together, from Charlotte with the teachings of the real mute. Oh boy, it's dangerous for him to be left behind. But leaving that 10 aside, we are explained that the process of building a mana circle is basically the same, which in this case is circulating mana around the heart at a constant speed, then simply record it in a mana ring. And this was theoretically supposed to be a process that took decades to do. More second to sepia. The protagonist was already in the second circle. To explain in a few words, the speed of mana rotation in the person's heart is measured by RPM, and normally the wizards of first circles have a speed of 300 revolutions per minute, or 300 RPM. The thing is that currently, Deo has 2000 RPM in his first circle and 400 in the other. What theoretically? He has already reached the goal to hit the third circle, which for those who didn't understand is 300 RPM for each ring. However, to see if he was really good with magic, he went there and improved his ice bullet, making it more resistant people, making it rotate even more. And while I don't know what he has against the trees, but the first one he found in front, he already caused a gigantic hole in the poor thing. And seeing that, Sepp obviously already started congratulating the protagonist, and he declared that it was all thanks to her. Only internally, Sepp was still a little scared of the talent. Deaf absurd of God, but at the same time that he left her scared, she also had more confidence. The thing is that while she was saying that, she gave the protagonist a hug, declaring that he was her pride, and that I don't know what. And he already started to find this a little strange. But going back to the main objective, he continued training a little with his magic, raising an ice wall, and even made an ice shotgun, which in the case is throwing a shard that explodes all over the place. Forward. They went every which way, didn't they? Just forward. And leaving that aside, out of nowhere, Charlotte appeared, interrupting the training of God, and apparently, she was also training the movements that Raimu had said she needed to train. God commented that she's cool and stuff. But what was she doing there out of nowhere? Kind of embarrassed. She arrived, apologizing for being too rude and arrogant. But according to D, rude and arrogant was little of what she did. But in the end, he forgave her. And another, she also didn't need to be so formal. Because hey, they're the same age and stuff. It's like that. Apologies and forgiveness here and there. Charlotte commented that she liked the climate of the educated, because the moment she trained and then stopped a bit, it was already chilly. Seeing this, God was happy. After all, he didn't know that there was another person who thought the same as him. It's like that. While the two were talking, Saxon together with his wife, just take a look at the two, commenting that maybe those two there could have something more in the future. And according to Helena, a mother's duty is to help her son be honest with what he feels. And so, sometime later, in the surroundings of the educated, Helena went to do her social work, delivering clothes and food to street beggars. Of course, in addition to food and some basic items. Weekly, she manages to get them a job, right? Because man, otherwise the guys will be living at the expense of the educated. The thing is, while he hates, I was thinking about that, the boy approached Charlotte, asking her to help him, because his mother was in danger. And of course, given that, they accepted and stuff. The problem is that a little while later, while they were following where the mother was of this boy, God noticed that it was a very dark alley, and without any movement, a perfect place to make an attack. And there was no other way. The moment they got there, they were quickly approached by some bandits. And then they started explaining to God that he could get out of there, because their business was with that girl next to him. However, the Deo did not accept. After all, as he had sworn to the young woman of the house, or Hoot should be protected from dangers like that. I'm seeing that one there. The leader of the bandits, who is the little green hair there, said it was quite interesting and stuff. But it was a promise between children. Anyway, he just sent his subordinates to go after Deus. And Charlotte asked what the hell they were going to do. After all, she was without her sword. Deus replied that he was fine, and another that she would. A perfect opportunity to test your new dark monster ability. And speaking of testing skills, the moment the bandits attacked, Deus simply attacked everyone at the same time, and already feeling the danger, the leader asked everyone to retreat. But one couldn't. Oh, and for those who want to know, The new shadow cloak ability, discovered after reaching the second circle, is to implant a shadow creature, as if it were a parasite, and the target it hit would become an undead. That moves according to the shadows. In the case, that bandit that day is hit, turned into a gigantic monster, as if he were controlling with necromancy, is in the face of this situation. The leader of the bandits asked his henchmen to deal with that monster. Strange. While he would deal with Deus, which I don't think was a very good idea, because like this, the leader seems to have a very interesting ability, create clones and stuff, and even make ranged attacks. But Deus went there and used that ability, looking like an ice shotgun, hit the leader and the little guy who was in the back. And already the monster was managing to kill all the henchmen who were there and going back to the gods' fight side, which isn't even considered a fight, right? More or less a skill test. The leader had even survived the attack. I don't know how, but it didn't do much good, because in the next moment Deo went there and attacked him, smashing his whole body. Anyway, before that, Deo went there, raised Charlotte, asking if she was okay alcohol. She answered yes. And even a bandit who tried to escape. But it didn't even take time. And taking his shadow creature like that, from that body, zombified, Odeo approached the bandit he had knocked to the ground, who had already started begging for his life, saying he would say everything he knew. But his head was pierced with God, saying he wasn't particularly interested in what he would say. And in the face of this whole situation, Charlotte looked around and I asked if for any reason she was feeling bad. After all, this is the true face of the educated of Saxon. Besides, this was the sword that was protecting her, so she wouldn't mind, would she? Charlotte commented that yes, she was a little scared and stuff, but it was all right. After all, as he had said, she would protect him. Besides, after that oath, in the future, she would become his sword. Of course, seeing the power of our protagonist now, she was more anxious than ever to get stronger. The thing is that, protecting Charlotte a little for part of the guilt that Eudeus felt for having killed Babel in his previous life. That's why for Eudeus, choosing her to be his sword in the future, it has a meaning much bigger than he could imagine now. Meanwhile, on the side of the Count of Brandenburg, boy, the bug was screwed. Because summarizing, what happened? Well, he was invited gently to the Duchy of Saxon because he was being accused of kidnapping. And this invitation was something to which he could not refuse. So sometime later he arrived in the duchy, where the Saxon received him gently in quotes, while the two exchanged greetings. Here and there, the Brandenburger already gave a look of hatred, both to Charlotte and to Deus. But back to the main subject. The Brandenburger began to say that never cool the cotton, dishonorable as kidnapping. After all, he is a loyal sword. The emperor. The business here. Apparently Sax didn't want much conversation, because out of nowhere he used magic, to which Brandenburg even managed to defend himself with Durandal. The thing is that the knights who were behind him, literally, evaporated for some reason. And before this magic, Brandenburg already recognized it as black magic, high level, state of Nero. And well, Saxon used that magic to tell Brandenburg that if he tries to touch his children one more time, he would murder every member of the Brandenburg family. And with Brandenburg already kneeling on the floor, Saxon said that if by any chance he was tired of the long trip, he could stay there for a while to rest. Or what good? It's obvious he wouldn't accept it, right? He already started saying that he had some issues. Urgent. So he couldn't stay there any longer. It is like that. While Brandenburger was leaving, God began to reflect that the Count was one of the followers most loyal to the emperor, and what his father showed this great and faithful faction of the emperor would become the bomb that would shake the empire in the future. And this small spark would become a great flame, to the point where the hatred one day could rip out the head of the saint of the sword. And while all the rumors were running that the Count of Benderburg ended up kneeling before the Black Duke, who was the father of our protagonist, Sexy showed something how interesting to Sepia was. The bodies of the guild members, of the bandits who attacked Dio, and just by looking at the bodies, Sepia began to wonder if by any chance Her way of teaching was totally wrong. Interrupting her thoughts, the Saxon told Sepia that he needed her help to raise Deo, and that as a consequence of this, he would like to give her the position of chief advisor, which is basically what she would become, part of the Saxon family, instead of just a tutor. And after a few seconds, and thinking here and there, Asim accepted, and she already accepted, commenting that this was probably the most complicated thing she's ever received to date. Anyway, a while later came Day's 10th birthday, which unlike the previous one, there were quite a few people from the Emperor's faction. The thing is that the person most notable among them was Marquis Yules. That just by the little smile, he wasn't in good intention, but good. Looking around, the names of the imperial capital, which was the heart of the Empire faction, the greatest force that constitutes the name of the Emperor. But in summary, the reason he was strangled for that banquet is an implicit warning, a message from the imperial family, that they would not stand still for what happened to the Sword Saint. And the main messenger was none other than Marquis Yules, and he was the head of the Red Tower, who sought order through power. And just remembering them, the protector already gives him pain, because that staff did a lot of experiments on his body. That wasn't very pleasant. While I was thinking about this, and they were saying several things, praising him for what he had done, that he was a genius, that I don't know what, and all these comments, God only replied that it was nothing. He was just a child, and thanked the Marquis and Yules for being there. And after this statement, God simply left, reflecting that he actually wanted to be training with Charlotte. But as she is theoretically Helena's helper, she couldn't do anything with everyone. His thoughts are interrupted with a cry for help, to which when God approached, he noticed it was a maid, and she was being almost assaulted by a guy at the party, declaring that she, being a servant, should entertain the guests in the best way possible. It is clear that it is fair. At that moment, Odeo appeared, asking the fat guy there what he was doing, and the chubby guy had the audacity to ask Odeo if he has ever been with a woman, or probably not, right? Since he was a child. Therefore, he would show what the true pleasure of life was. But I hate you didn't want to know about that now, and simply attacked the fat man, and didn't kill him, since being a big problem, him directly killing a person related to the Emperor's faction. And with his cheek cut, the fat guy started asking what the hell I hate was doing, and he simply ordered the fat guy to kneel. After all, he attacked a servant of the Saxon house, but the fat guy started saying that he was sent by the Emperor, and he couldn't do that, and that I don't know what. The thing is that at that moment, Saxon together with several guests, already Helena and the Marquis and others were, your situation. Meanwhile, then I was there asking the fat guy to kneel and stuff. And of course, in view of this, Sashin asked Odeo what the hell he was doing. Then Odeo briefly explained the situation and asked the fat guy to kneel, in disrespect for what he had caused. Another, he declared that they, nobles who came from the imperial capital, were entrusted with an important duty to act in the name of the Emperor. But even so, that man tried to insult His Majesty's name, harassing a miserable employee. And in light of all these facts, Yules declared that God's words are absolutely correct. Folks, hearing that, then boy the fatty even tried to run. But who said Yules forgave him? He simply toasted the fatty, while telling God that his words were covered in reason. After all, his role was to teach the worms that try to insult the family, imperial, and the empire. Then of course, because of that situation, he had great expectations for Dale's future. And while soon after that everyone left, and the next day, the same servant that God saved woke him up. Oh, and of course, halfway and embarrassed, she thanked him for saving her. And just looking at her expression, God noticed that she was agitated to say that. But given the way his family is, there wasn't much to say, right? But being the eldest son of the Sashi case, he will do his best if it is to overthrow the empire. The real problem is that the good, his happiness has already been dragged away, because the moment he found his father, he already started asking what the hell he was doing. I gave the straight laugh. The subject declared that if the hero from another world had died in the battle against Batu, that was a divine sword. The next target would certainly have been the Duchy of Saxum, and of course, faced with this statement, The Saxum asked how his son was so sure of this, and of course I read. Couldn't say he knew, could he? But he's kind of making up a story, along with the real facts he had. Basically, it's like this. The Empire gave up completely exterminating the king's territory, Demon, and it was simply given to the Duchy of Saxum, as they failed to eliminate that threat completely. Their territory was always going to bleed, in quotation marks, besides the people from the Empire and the people from outside. They called their ducal house Son of Darkness. So following that line of thinking, as they discarded the hero, it is also logical that eliminating the internal threat is the most obvious thing to do. Oh, and the Deo explained that he found out that the hero was discarded because of books and stuff. But we already know the truth, right? But in the head of the Sax, yes. Deo had a brilliant head, a wisdom that was far beyond his age. As he had made such a statement, the Saxon went and asked his son how their house should act from now on. Deo was short and direct, declaring that their duchy and the empire could not coexist in the same world. In the case, they simply should destroy the empire. And of course, in the face of the Deo's statement, Saxon asked if he understood what he was saying. Then I said yes, and another no. It was as if he wanted to take their soldiers and leave. Now for a rebellion. He only wanted this in 10 years. Because even now, there were forces on the continent wanting independence. Others were suffering because of the empire. And from there the god wanted to join forces with these people and increase their own strength, so that the empire has nothing against them. And from then on, he explained more and more of the plan, until almost the end of the night. And listening to the empire's destruction plan that Deo gave, Saxon commented that his talent was immeasurable, and he was so impressed that from now on, Deo was not just the firstborn of the House of Cal, nor just a 10-year-old child, but the respected and future pure leader of the house. Sashin or Saxon also changes his name all the time. In few words, even though he is 10 years old, he has the same power of command as his father within his house. And of course, having this power in hand, I-Hate has already declared that there was something he wanted to do, which in the case is permission to take the tower test in Necropolis. And summarizing, it's a test where several mages were going to face each other to win the hierarchy inside the tower, where there were also guardians, and those who defeated them earned the right to become an elder of the tower. The thing is that whoever got to the top became the master of it. The problem is that it was a little difficult, with risk of death. And another, the god hadn't even reached the third circle, which was the minimum. But God said he would fix it. And Saxon even tried to convince his son otherwise. But he said that this was the best way to their house, because if he proved his worth in the tower, his father's position would be strengthened by having a recognized heir. Besides, that way, at least he would conquer a real reputation, and not just exaggerated rumors, which he has achieved so far. It is before these facts the Saxon accepted and would trust his son's judgment. And not long after, they already went to the city of Necropolis. And the moment they arrived, they were received as if it were a real authority, which they were right. The thing is that even having spent 10 years in that body, I still think it's too much. This amount of reverence they have for them. And stuff this. People who were around started commenting about the rumors around of Dio and stuff. And of course, not everyone believed these rumors. In the case of that blonde guy who acted like he was hot stuff, saying he was going to pass in first place. Anyway, talking to Dio going back to his side, they ended up finding Eris, who was an elder of the tower, in addition to being the general secretary, who oversaw the affairs of the tower, in the absence of the Black Duke, who was the father of our protagonist. And before that, Iris took Deo to the place where the test would be carried out. And in addition to the day, I had 59 more academy graduates who would participate him together in the test. And well, after that, then he introduced himself to everyone as the tower hook, I don't know what. Skipping all the blah blah blah, she started explaining how would be the first test in first floor of the tower. And in few words, it was a battle royale that had that little necklace there, that had the life points. But they couldn't attack each other directly. They should use necromancy on the corpses that were on the ground to thus hit their opponent. and each hit on the opponent counted 1 point. That good. Basically made the guy lose. And the person who has 3 points until the end of the test would advance to the next floor. Oh, and one more. Any kind of artifact is prohibited. Otherwise, they would be disqualified and immediately. The problem is that before the test starts, that little blondie from before already started humiliating Deus, saying he was weak, and why a 10-year-old child was there. But leaving that extras chatter aside, the test started. And boy, the people already focused everything on poor Dio. That yes, he didn't stand still and managed to control a corpse, protecting him. And he wouldn't stand still. He started using ice magic, which already made everyone scared, because at 10 years old, he was already a double mage. And seeing that, he was using 2 magics at the same time. And the water magic in the corpse he was controlling, the blondie from before, already started saying that this can't be done. That I don't know what. But Eris didn't say anything. She didn't even stop the test. It meant that this was within the rule. Since in the end, the only thing you can't use is fact, right? Given this, Laram was already revolted, and everyone already gathered on top of Deus. Once again, and he couldn't use the artifact. He simply dodged everyone, attacked a specific zombie that was armed, and after breaking and stealing the undead sword, he started cutting everyone here and there. And he was cutting, because he used a magic on his sword, which was still allowed, and from then on it was basically the following. He was defeating all the living dead he found in front of him, together with each of the candidates. And for some reason, he left the little blonde in the end, since he was the most annoying. So maybe it was a better taste. Anyway, after defeating 99 candidates, he was the only person who passed to the second floor. And good, at least our protagonist can say that in the end, the first place is his, right? And good like that. The second phase was to defeat a meat golem giant. That was supposed to be done in a group. But since the Eye is the only one who passed the test, he'll have to do it alone. Which in the end, summarizing the entire fight, it wasn't a problem for him, since he used a black magic that accelerated the decomposition of a body so easily. A boss. That was supposed to be done in a group, right? And from their multi-etos. Basically, what Deo did was breaking records and behind records until reaching the 10th phase, to which he had to wait 4 days off and stuff. Because for him to dance, right? And while that was happening, there was a rare re-examination of 59, who lost the Peridio, with the exception of him. On the same night where Deus won 9 tests in a row, a sepia approached him, congratulating, saying she was proud and I don't know what, and taking advantage of his opportunity, and the gratitude of his master. The Prota went there and simply called her for a date, which she didn't understand very well, right? But she ended up accepting, because well, in the end, a child won't know what a date means, right? So another day, at the festival that was taking place in the city of Necropolis, they were walking quietly here and there. The real problem is that their date had nothing special. They were literally walking without saying almost anything to each other, like the silence wasn't shameful. Then, I was reflecting that his master has always been like this, and maybe this is because she always trusted him. And because of that, he wanted to be closer to her, and to understand why he was thinking that way. We'll have to go back a bit in time, where he was forming his 3rd cycle. When he was about to form it, he entered that place, where his master had said is the space of the mind. The problem is that when he got there, he felt like a sword had pierced his body, and when he looked back, he was in a completely desolate and empty place, or better, in that endless empty world. His mistress's hand was the only important thing he had there, and since she was there in his mind world, maybe he wanted her to be part of his world, or something. And following that line of thought, he went there and simply declared himself to his mistress, which is a bit strange, right? And he's thinking he's rude now. What is that? Which is good if you stop to think about it. Rudius' mistress also has blue hair and stuff. Man, I think that. Let's continue. And yes, the end that our protagonist had was the same as Rudius. In the case, his mistress thought it was an infantile passion and stuff, and said that she liked him. Which good. Poor thing, no. In the end, he didn't get anything. Nothing left for Batinia. Anyway, a few days after this statement, that didn't go so well. Obviously I gave where he got a little pissed, right? Because, well, he declared himself and stuff, but in the end, it seemed like it was a childhood passion. Anyway, going back to the main objective, the last test would be a magical duel, where Deo would face the third circle master, Elbert Rosenheim. And one more. In that phase, he could use artifacts, magic, and a lot of protection if he wanted. Or in few words, it meant that the Deo could use all the power, that he had brothers. Business that while he was thinking about it, out of nowhere Elbert simply attacked him, to which the god even managed to defend himself. But Elbert had already prepared several attacks, to which the poor god, had to find a way to keep dodging of each of them. And he was revolted, right? Because the guy just started attacking like that out of nowhere. And the little guys there weren't even caring about the business here. To make matters worse, Ebert started saying some things, somewhat strange, like reactions from the darkness. Deeper, past that is night, thirsty for blood. Summarizing, second-hand embarrassment. This is just to raise corpses, okay? We'll understand why this. Anyway, God was dodging attacks here and there, using shadows to kill some of the dead. Living, however, taking advantage of an opportunity. Elbert used the corpse explosion. That hit or maybe not God. And when Elbert realized, man, God was already on his back, congratulating him for having made such an attack. Sneaky. But that would be the end. And so God started using his power of shadows and stuck to Elbert's legs. How nice. His shadows were already hungry. And because of that, Albert was almost devoured. And God had to stop his shadows. Otherwise things would get ugly. Anyway, he won the first fight. Apparently that was the only one he would fight. Because from then on people started giving up. And from then on, to summarize my boring chat, the thing was the following. He kept going up. And during that time, he was defeating guardians here and there, improving its 3 circles, until he reached the 20th floor, where there was an opponent that that stopped. He who was nothing more and nothing less than a Dullahan, or also known for those closest. Headless Knight. That according to the audience's comment, that Dullahan there was made, personally by the Elder of the Black Tower. So, theoretically that creature is supposed to be strong for a fight. The thing is that neither. That Deo used shadow magic. Of him the Dullahan simply knelt before Deo, with just one order, which in this case was to pierce his own body. The good Dullahan killed himself. So in this case, there was no fight. It was literally unilateral. And yes, Deo remembered that he was in the middle of a test, and noticed that they had gone a little too far. After all, he simply caught one Dullahan, who is known for being loyal to his master. He made him break loyalty, and simply kill himself, which was quite strange. And because of that, so the atmosphere doesn't get too weird, God simply left. He could go even higher. Only if he did, it would transfer the kingdom of monsters and become something, perhaps unknown. Anyway, how he reached the 20th floor. As soon as he left the Black Tower with his father, the two received military greetings, not just from nobles of Sasha's house, but also all the mages of the Black Tower, including the elders. And so, with the deeds, extraordinary from Deal, the entire northern region slowly began to unify. And speaking of the Northern Territory, once again, they started the hunt against the orcs. And this time who was leading was Deal. That yes, it was a somewhat absurd responsibility. Deaf for a 10-year-old boy, but none of the Black Knights doubted his ability as commander. Anyway, sometime later, according to reports they passed to Saxon, they killed 145 orcs, with no casualties, only 3 injured. And of course in light of this, Saxon has already started praising his son. The Realmo also joined that wave, and started talking very well and stuff, declaring that the Deo served very well for the role of commander, and was even getting used to him. But according to Deo, this was because Realmo was passing everything on to him, all commander knowledge, cavalry, everything. If he continued like this, together with the experience he would acquire over time, it would take a long time for him to command his own territory. And given the reports to his father, God quickly went to do his daily training with Charlotte, to which it had been a while since we saw her fighting, but it seems she had improved a lot, even though in the end she still lost to the Deo. Deo even tried to praise her, but it seems she was very proud. Because she didn't like unfounded praise very much. Because being compared to Deo, who arrived in the third magic circle and passed the 20th test of the magic tower, she was nothing. If you look on the bright side, at least she doesn't have to stay. Is suffering from a lot of flattery and humor. Where she goes, I seeing that God had to agree. This part is very boring. And another more. Forward. She would certainly become strong. And this was a somewhat sincere comment, which already caught Charlotte by surprise. And then she was embarrassed, I don't know what. Just skipping that. Another part arrived in God's daily routine, which in this case was learning strategies. Military with the real mute, which according to the real mute, they would learn the hammer and anvil tactic. To try to explain to you, it's basically the following. It's the infantry that are the knights with shields. The thing like that holds the enemies, while the cavalry goes around behind and presses the enemies against the infantry, which is in the same movement as a hammer hitting the anvil. That's why it has that name. Understood. Changing the subject a little. Then he asked how Charlotte's training was going, which the real mute said was going well. Of course, if compared to that of our protagonist, it was very different. But she was doing well. But despite this, there was a small problem, which is her compatibility with their style. And for you to understand more or less, a water refines your circle in your heart to increase your power. And the knights already have the aura which they should refine too. And just like the mages, they also have a tower that has a power structure. The knights had an order to pass on their legacy that in the case, the black cavalry who acted with weight in wars, and the order of the Knight Raven, who worked in the north for the Satch family. They are basically based on strength and power. That was a problem for Charlotte, because her style was based on speed. And of course, if you consider her talent, she can easily reach the level of 7th sword. But maybe, if she followed that path, she would never reach the first. Oh, and just so you know, her father managed to get his position. Okay, but one small problem, and used a style called Spring Sword. But after the fall of the knights along with the death of his father, this style was completely lost, thus leaving this problem aside, while trying to increase his reputation through commitments, exhausting and subjugation of monsters. The day our protagonist should prove the results of your training arrived right at his doorstep, which in this case was a declaration of war between domains of a baron. Yes, from a baron that makes absolutely no sense. The guy is weaker than an educated one. That's because it enters currency. There was a copper mine there and stuff. And another is this currency business in that world. There is somewhat strange, because it was not well defined. But leaving that one aside, the reason the Baron is having so much courage to hit head-on against the Black Duke, Brandenburg would ally the Baron, of course, in exchange for sharing mine resources of copper. Como Brandenburg se agentando nessa luta, pelos dominios. A ordem de Santa Madalena se Huntaria, a batalha, o que mostrava e que mesmo depois do tempo, paris que ele ainda não se esquecido de humilheo, que ele sofre do seu pai. E isso machachos. Terminamos hoje por aqui. Se você quer continuação dessa belíssima obra, comenta ai humilhado. Porque o coitado do cara ali a misericordia, e outrae. Se inscreva nos membro aina. Ajuder pra ajuder nos ai. E isona. Eu eco. Oneo. Se inscreve no canal também se já chego 8 aqui doido. E so clicar no botão ali. De qualquer forma, já enrolei bastante. Vai pro próximo video. Com outro treino tal bom quanto esse.